I was under contract, you see, to RKO Studios, and I learned that Fred Astaire was to be put under contract to RKO. He was in New York and I was in California. And I had met Fred when he was doing Bandwagon with his sister in New York. I had been in New York at the time when I met him. I had done a musical comedy that was called Girl Crazy, that was George and Ira Gershwin. It was one of their musical comedies in which Ethel Merman was her first big Broadway show. It was my first big Broadway show. And so we and others starred in this musical comedy. They called for Fred Astaire to come over from his musical comedy to see if he couldn't give some aid in a number, a Gershwin number that they were having a little choreographing problem. And he came over, and I had already met him because I'd gone backstage to meet Fred. As a matter of fact, the man who was the editor of the New Yorker magazine, Harold Ross, and I had gone to see the Astaires, Fred and his sister, do this musical comedy, The Bandwagon, and went backstage afterward, talked to him, and I was delighted to meet such a marvelous performer and his sister. So he came over to Girl Crazy during this rehearsal and stood by while the choreographer and made suggestions for the number and so on. He didn't actually choreograph it from A to Z, but he gave some criticisms, and they were certainly well taken. And I thought that was very nice of him to do that. He knew the producer quite well. They liked him extremely well, so it was just a kind of a favor, I guess. At least that's the way I understood it. And Mr. Astaire's really quite a wonderful man in his own inimitable fashion. He's a worker. He loves it. Perfectionist, great perfectionist. And I love perfectionists. I think they're the best kind, as far as I'm concerned. And therefore, my working with him was always an important time, because being a female, I may not work like a man works. I think very few women do work like men work, but I love the business I'm in, and I love working the work I do. And I loved musicals. I had been in musicals before. I'd been in musical movies prior to working with Fred. So the interest was to be in a film with him, working with him. It was just something different and new for me. So I enjoyed it thoroughly and learned to respect him greatly, as everyone did who worked with him. I was very fond of him, and occasionally I got to see him once in a while. I saw him not too long ago in a restaurant with his sister. Two of them were there having dinner. As a matter of fact, it was Chasen's in Beverly Hills. And it was great to get a look at him again. My host that night was Frank Sinatra at A Tale of 12, and Frank was facing the back of the restaurant, and he turned to me as we were coming in to sit down. He says, "There's your partner." Well, I hadn't expected to know what he meant at the moment when he said, "There's your partner." And so as we were seated, I said, "What do you mean, my partner?" He said, "Well, there's your partner." So I looked back in the back of where it's rather dimly lighted, and there was Fred and his sister and a friend of theirs. And so I forgave myself and went over and sat down. I think I think Frank Sinatra could have wished he had not said that, because I disappeared from the party for so long. I stayed over and talked with Fred and Adele for such a long time. I sort of ruined the dinner table for a little while by not being present. Gaps in the table are rather not fun when you're the host. So I became a gap in the table. But so I do see him up on occasion, and we do say, we must get together, like all people do who've worked together at one time or another, and they all say we must get together, and we never do. It was great fun working with Fred, really great fun. I learned a lot, and of course I always learn a lot, no matter where I work and with whom I work. I think dancing with him was a marvelous experience. I look upon it as one of the very exciting experiences in my career. And, of course, I must say it did not bring me an Academy Award, but I had to do another picture to get that. I had to do Kitty Foyle without him to get an Academy Award. But at that time, they were never giving Academy Awards to musical comedies. Musical comedy performers were not getting Academy Awards. I don't think they are yet, really. It's too bad, too, because they should. But the invitation to play with Fred in Flying Down to Rio came as a surprise. I knew he was on the lot, the RKO lot, that is. I knew he was on the lot, and I knew he was there to make movies, as I was, and I knew that he had been, at that time, quite recently married to his wife, and I knew they were trying to get themselves settled into California living. So when we started rehearsals, I was very pleased to do this kind of a movie, because I had done leading women and comedian roles and musicals at Warner Brothers before that, such as 42nd Street and a few other things like that. So this was going to be a marvelous experience, and it was. Never did I suspect, neither did he, neither did anyone else, that this would ever turn out to be a long, long run of teaming with anyone. There were many teams at that time working together, comedians and singers, and I guess we were the dancing team of that particular era. I think we were the first dancing team of that particular era. But the working with him, contrary to what a lot of people might seem to like to believe, the working with Mr. Astaire was a very happy, harmonious, and well-adjusted time for me, and I would imagine for him. I would hope that it was for him. I never have been able to say enough nice things in connection with him, but the question has always come up, have you never disagreed? Well, I've always said that if you are married to someone and you adore them, do you ever disagree? I wonder if there are those who do never disagree.
On that particular thing, he was adamant, and he went further than he said, I don't know why the press wanted to find some disagreement. Have you any idea why they wanted to find?
The reasons that the press, I think, pointed out that there was difficulty between us was somewhat formulated in the front office of the public relations publicity department that had nothing to talk about and needed to create a friction to get something in the papers. And people love to read about friction. And so it fed the flames of the reader to say, aha, finally they're having trouble. We had nothing like that. We worked along like lyrics and music of Irving Berlin. They blend. And we blended. We did. It was wonderful. Yes.
Sorry, with Flying Down to Rio, when you'd made it, and suddenly you'd heard it was a smash hit, what were your feelings? Were you excited?
Well, Flying Down to Rio, firstly, was a very big, at that time, Flying Down to Rio was a very expensive and one of the big films of the movie industry. You may not think so when you look at it now, as compared with the things that have been done in the big screens, which we did not have at the time, and color, which we did not have at the time. But we did have big sets, and we did have thousands of chorus, girls and boys, and dancers and singers. We had all of that. And this, Flying Down to Rio, was a top musical, made at RKO. It was kind of the envy of everyone to be in. Everyone wanted to have had some role in it. I must say that the role that Mr. Astaire and I had were not starring roles. We were not the stars of that film at all. There was Dolores Del Rio and Jean Raymond. They were the stars. We were not the stars.
That is absolutely amazing, because nowhere have I read, or nowhere has anybody else volunteered that bit of information.
Well, all you have to do is to look at the printed sheet of music, and you'll see who is the star. Dolores Del Rio and Jean Raymond, and it says, and also, and we are the and alsos. We are the second string. And so when we came in as being so highly touted as the main reason to go to the film, people would say, that's the main reason to go to the film, is to see these two dance this happy dance, the karaoke. And so I think that it really gave that film a better want to see than it would have had without it. You know, everyone came away wanting to do the karaoke, which was nothing really but happiness and good music put together in a team, two people who love to dance. So,
did you find him, because you had danced before, hadn't you?
Oh yes, I started out as a dancer.
You danced before a lot. Was it the first time you'd had to work very closely with a partner? Had you previously been basically a solo dancer before?
I had done mostly solos in my beginnings, and but I had danced with. My particular performance in its beginnings was as a dancer solely, and I had, in the vaudeville term, an act. And this act was composed of 3 people, in which I was the star of the act, and the other 2 were there to help me. And this was wonderful, because it kept. You see, it's marvelous in the experience of an individual. We always qualify for something, and without all of this background, I could not have qualified. You see, for this wonderful opportunity that came up at this particular time.
Because it seems to me that it must have been a more difficult adjustment for you, because Fred had been used to dancing with a partner right up until the point he worked with you. He'd been used to dancing equally with a partner. Mm-hmm. You'd been used primarily to being Ginger Rogers plus.
Ginger Rogers dancer, yes.
Rogers, yeah. I just wonder whether you found any difficulty in adjusting to an equal relationship, a relationship where the 2 of you were at the same level.
No, the interesting thing about my thoughts of performing, because that's what it really comes down to, it's what do I think about performing. Each of us look at something completely differently. But my thoughts have to do with, if it's new, it's interesting and different, not is it new that it's new, it's hard and difficult and unfriendly. If it's new, it's something to challenge and learn and overcome and be victorious about. So this is the only way I've ever been able to approach anything and have any amount of success.
Did your separate approaches to work and temperaments about working differ at all?
I think it's so interesting that everyone feels as though they have to make a difference in getting to the top of a mountain. When you get to the top of a mountain, you head upward, and I feel that that's what Mr. Astaire and I did. We headed upward and onward, and we didn't go half the way one and half the way the other. We went together, singing merrily on our way. There was no difference in our desires that I can see. See, a desire to accomplish, the desire to have fun, have gaiety, have newness. The differences I guess, are just like the differences in what you eat for breakfast, and they're not of any major quality. I don't see. We both had the same aims and desires and the willingness. We expressed it a little differently, perhaps, but it was.
I suppose that's really what I'm getting at in the expression, because he was, from all accounts, a very serious person. I don't mean serious about what he did, because any professional is serious about what they do, but he went about it in a fairly serious way. You're more of an extrovert character, aren't you, I believe? Maybe you're not when you're working. Maybe you are absolutely serious. You know, one can't help almost seeing the two of you working side by side, him poker-faced, and you enjoying what you're doing, and showing that you're enjoying what you're doing.
Well, if you call that being an extrovert, then I am an extrovert. If showing what you're doing causes you to smile and laugh, yes, then I am an extrovert. But I would not say that word fits me, but in that case, maybe it does.
Because one gets the impression that very often he didn't appear to enjoy what he was doing, although he was at the time. He didn't appear to always enjoy it. It was always, well, let's do another. That wasn't right. Let's do another.
Oh, he was no different in that respect. I always wanted to do another take.
In fact,
I was tireless, you know.
Well, this.
There's one thing that could never happen. They could never tire me out. They've never been able to yet.
Well, since
my working with Fred, they'd say, let's do another. Would you like to? And I was ready to go. The only time I never stopped was when my hair was wet, dripping down my back, wet with perspiration, and they had to stop, and they had to curl my hair, and they had to do it, or it wouldn't match up.
But Hermes Pan, in fact, told us of one particular routine. This was since I sent you the questions, when he said you did take after take after take, and he said at the end of it there was blood on the floor. Can you tell us?
From my shoes, no. It's not a very pretty thing to talk about. No, I working very hard. I guess a racehorse can have a foot problem. But you see, a woman doesn't wear flat shoes like a man does. That is, women who like to look dainty and like to look feminine do not wear flat shoes if they're going to dance in an evening dress. I don't like to look at it if they do, and I don't like to wear them. So I wear shoes that have a heel, and therefore heels are very tiring. Very tiring. And they also can cause your feet to to blister if you're not careful. So that happened to me many times. And this one particular time, in reference to the one you speak about, it didn't dawn. We went back and did another one, another take, and another take, and another take. So So what? My feet were bloody and it didn't matter. We just went on.
Did you feel a sense of achievement at the end of a good routine? Did you know?
Always felt a sense of achievement. At the end of each routine, as I just said to you, I always wanted to do it one more time. I always felt there was something that could be bettered. And I think that's my nature. I like to keep going until I feel that that's out of that group. There's the best. We'll find the best one, which is what you can do with film. You can stack it up and line it up, and then go and run them all and choose what you like and see what you like. And out of that, you can say, the best one is in there. I know, and I prefer that number, so and so. And more times than not, you're right.
Do you think that perhaps one of the secrets of the success of the partnership was the fact that it was two perfectionists working to the same end?
Well, I think it was a really God's blessing that we did have that love of quality. I think we both loved quality. And that's one of the things I love about Fred Astaire, is the quality of his thought. And when it comes to his performance, quality had to always be present, or he would stay until dawn to see that it was present. And so, being of the same cut, I very much appreciated that. As a matter of fact, anyone who's ever worked with me will tell you that I will stay and stay and stay until everybody else is dropping all around me, and I'll get it right, or else I'll stay until it's right.
So really, it was in that way, it was putting two of a kind together, because he really was exactly the same.
Yes, I was the feminine side of that, and he was the masculine side of that.
In Gay Divorcee, can you remember the night and day routine?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did it strike you at the time? Did the night and day routine strike you as being an outstanding routine at the time?
Night and Day was one of the really lovely, lovely numbers that Fred and I did. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I enjoyed every rehearsal for it. I enjoyed... one thing I think is great fun is the rehearsal of a dance routine. I don't think there's anything more, except going to the circus maybe, but the rehearsal of a dance routine is just actually, it's like kids having a lollipop, I guess. I love the rehearsal, the practicing, the getting a routine in shape. It was Flag Day, as far as I was concerned, loving it as I did. And the actual shooting of a number was sort of after the fact. I enjoyed myself very much during the rehearsal. I thought, oh, now we have to get dressed and do it. All right, well, okay. And but I loved, even after dressing the dance and so on, I found it was as much as beautiful as it was fun to do. It was a beautiful number, in my opinion. It was fun to do, in my opinion. It had dramatic qualities, which I think were very basic to the plot. And I would say it's probably one of my favorite, or if I haven't already said so, I do say it is one of my favorite numbers.
At what stage did you begin to worry about being typecast in the films you did together?
Being typecast was not something necessarily that I was afraid of. What I was afraid of was that I was not going to get an opportunity to play a dramatic role I wanted to play. I didn't care how many musicals I was allowed to make, as long as I was allowed to make a drama once in a while. And it seemed that I was going from one musical, one comedy, into another musical and into another comedy, and into another musical and another comedy, and the dramatic roles were fading out of my particular experience. I didn't want that to happen. So if something had to give, it was going to have to give, and I was going to have to give up doing one of these others to do what I wanted to do. But it was not at all in reference to what I had been doing. It was that I wanted something else to do. Not only another thing, but just an added thing to do.
And in fact, the point at which you began to be concerned about this, was this the point at which you stopped making films together? Or was there a point sometime earlier when you were thinking, you know, I want this to be the last because I want a dramatic type role?
Well, actually, I can't allow words to be put in my mouth that I said that I want this to be the last movie because of a musical that I do with Mr. Astaire, because I never, A, never said that, B, never would say it, C, wouldn't dream of saying it, because I enjoyed doing, as I've taken a little time to explain to you, how much I enjoyed doing these films with Mr. Astaire, doing musicals. The musical diet is something I understand, and we like to do things we understand, and I do understand musical pictures. I wanted to do something else. I wanted to have the privilege of doing a dramatic role, and I had been very busy trying to get the studio to think more seriously in that respect, and finally they came through, and they did, but it was not without my constantly knocking on their door to remind them that they had promised and they were going to fulfill their promise. As I say, they did. And out of it, I was very fortunate to have received the Academy Award for that performance, which was Kitty Foyle. Prior to that, however, I had done a movie called Primrose Path, which was also, they were all RKO pictures, made in the same studio with different directors and whole new cast and so on. But, so my wish was granted. I got to do what I wanted to do. But never once did I ever say to anyone anything that about not wanting to do another musical with Fred Astaire or with anyone.
Fits the front office.
Pardon me?
It fits the front office handouts again, doesn't it? To
yes.
try and create a thing, but it's good. I mean, the fact that you've said that is really. I mean, excuse me asking questions like that. I'm not trying to say there was dispute. I'm really trying to get a definitive answer, and you've given me a definitive answer. You know, perfectly well. Sort of don't misunderstand my motives. It is really just to get things have been written and said through the years. And it's very good to get the answers that say, no, that was not true.
No, it wasn't.
Is it true you regarded Top Hat as your favourite picture?
No, it is not true. I love them all. I tell you why I have said that, because I know that the person who's listening to me wants something said that he understands. And if I say Top Hat, his eyes twinkle. But if I were to say Life of Vernon and Irene Castle, they say, See? Now, the answer to your question, what is my favorite? I have no favorites. The answer to your question is, it's like a mother with 10 children. Which one do you prefer above them all? Now, those were 10 movies. I prefer something in each of these lovely films that I think is worthwhile, interesting, I adore doing. I'm certain that anyone who's been in a movie will not say, that is my favorite movie from beginning to end. That is, if they're worth their salt.
Did you realize when making Top Hat that in the public's image, as you've just really admitted, it was going to be a very special film? As you were making it and as you'd made it before even the public had seen it, were you aware that there was, if you like, a masterpiece as far as the public were concerned?
Well, the Top Hat was a film that was a very expensive film for the studio to make. It was commanding an awful lot of space as far as the stages and sets and so on were concerned. It was the talk of the town because Irving Berlin had written such a very good score for it. But none of us realized that it would be such a smash hit as it turned out to be. We knew that it was going to be a good movie, and we knew we had good music to dance to and music to sing, but and that the story was half fun and half and humor with a good cast. No, the answer to your question is would I say that this was going to be a smash hit, and did I know that with all the electricity in the air about it, I knew that it would be an excellent film. I was thrilled, of course, as everyone was, that it turned out to be such a fine movie for that particular time. And I saw it the other night, as a matter of fact. And it's quite fun, and I like the fact that the tempo is different than today. The tempo of the whole storytelling is so marvelously time-consuming. They allow you to enjoy it. They allow you to move with them from place to place instead of slamming noise and words and well, I won't carry on about that. I don't like the films that I see mostly today, so I just was very pleased to see Top Hat again, and so there was a whole theater full of people viewing it, and they were very, very pleased. They applauded after each number. It was great fun.
A question not here, which has just suddenly occurred to me. In general, how do you like seeing films of you that were made a lot of years ago?
How do I like seeing films made of me a lot of years ago? I would like it very much if I could see them, but I'm afraid that I don't have the time. I'm a very busy woman. I am very busy in my own activities of theater and television, and I'm a fashion consultant for a big house here in New York, and I design my own lingerie for this company called the Ginger Rogers Collection, and it's a hobby of mine. And I'm so busy that if you told me that it was on the television 3 nights in a row, I would put it on my calendar and not get to see any of the 3 showings, unfortunately.
With Follow the Fleet, which came immediately after Top Hat, how did you feel it compared with Top Hat as a film?
Well, Follow the Fleet was the Levi and the dungaree type look as compared to the white tie and tails and evening dress look. So there's no way to compare them, because one was very somewhat slapstick, and the other was very had a dignity and a beauty and a grace that they you can't compare them. They're both good in their own right, and I thought Follow the Fleet was a great deal of fun, and I think it brought out a lot of joy, a lot of fun, and some people think it's one of the best we made. At least that's the lovely part of it is. It's like horse races. Everybody has one that they like, which is different than the other. It's great fun.
Was there costume travel in this film? And I don't mean that in a heavy sense. One gets the impression that in several films there were light-hearted things like the feathers getting everywhere in one film, and I believe in another film you had cuffs that in rehearsal kept on either smacking Fred on the face or whatever. Was there costume travel in Follow the Fleet that you can remember of?
Well, we had costume trouble in a number of films, but that's very natural. I mean, I don't know what movie doesn't have. I made films that were not dancing films, and I had costume trouble. So I don't know why this should be any different, but the at times that you're indicating by your questioning, it has to do with a bugle beaded dress that I wore in Follow the Fleet, and as I swung around under Mr. Astaire's arched arm, because his arm wasn't long enough, my poor little cuff of the bugle beaded dress, which was bell-shaped cuff, and the ladies will know what I mean by that. The bell shape in the whirl would aim outward, and in so doing, it would smack him in the face. And there was nothing I could do about it, and we tried to change the way we did the turn to avoid that. It did, and then it didn't sometimes. So that's the costume problem we had in Follow the Fleet.
What do you remember of the film Shall We Dance?
Not very much.
In Shall We Dance, there was, I believe, a scene in which you were meant to be in bed, and for reasons that possibly nowadays people wouldn't understand, a dummy was used. Was there any particular significance in filmmaking at this time, or anything? I mean, what were the reasons behind it? Why wasn't it you in a bed?
This was in Shall We Dance. Shall We Dance, the dummy in the bed instead of me in the bed. The reasons for that, I suppose, I really never bothered me, because I just read a script, and at that time I read a script as to how much had to be done and what work I had to put into it, and I rarely questioned the motivation of a sequence. If I felt I could better it, I would always tell the director that this would be better than what they had, which I did upon occasion. But this dummy in the bed that you referred to obviously had to do with the censor board. We had a censor board here in America at that time called the Hayes Office, and then it became the Breen Office. And I think the Catholic Church played a very important part in wanting to see that there were no offensive things done. Sometimes I wish that we had a censor board as of this day of 1974. I think we need something, because individual producers and directors and writers are not policing their own stories, their own writing, and their own directing as they should. So I suppose when you cannot have individuals who stand for the highest, you have to make laws to govern them. And unfortunately, they don't today. At that particular point of time, and you're referring to this film, must have been because they couldn't have had me in that bed. It would have been cut out by the censors.
Did you ever meet with the Astaires off the film set, socially?
Fred Astaire and his wife I met, yes, many times. Mrs. Astaire was a very tiny, very handsome woman, and with a good sense of humor and a very good homemaker. From all well, from what I knew about her. I was very busy in my own life. I'm afraid I didn't single out any people, the Astaires or anyone, to spend a lot of time with, because my life has been always a rather busy one. And I'm the outdoor type. I like tennis, and I like golf, and I like to be where the action is. And so consequently, instead of playing perhaps pool or something like that, I would be out the golf course, the tennis court. And I've been a guest in Mr. and Mrs. Astaire's home. I've known them not very closely, perhaps not as closely. Had I been a man, I would have been a closer friend to the family, because men who worked at the studio at that time were closer to Fred than I was, and that was because they were male. But a female who works with males, entering that home where the wife is, I don't care who she is, there's nothing to do with who she is. It automatically sets up a kind of unwillingness to include you in activities. Now, if you are happily married and an actress and a friend of the family, sometimes it works better because you bring your mate with you. But most generally, I was solo, alone, and being invited to a married house is not generally the thing to do.
Did his wife ever appear on the film set?
Mrs. Astaire came on the film set quite frequently. She always came on and brought her sewing or knitting and would sit there hour after hour after hour while we were doing and they would go and have lunch. Phyllis was her name. Phyllis and Fred would go and have lunch together, and then she'd come back and sit for a couple of hours, and then she'd go home. Yes, she was around an awful lot, and so I'm sure that everyone knows that when you're making a film, you're a very busy person. You don't have time to stop and have tea and talk and be pleasant and make jokes and all of that. Your time is really not your own. So even visitors who come to the set, all you can do is say hello to them and go on about your business.
I believe that in Carefree, the plot was a lot stronger than it had been in many of the previous films.
Yes, Carefree was a better storyline, and it had more substance than the other films that we had made previously. And I was very happy to have that film to do, because it, as a matter of fact, in Europe, they tell me, it was called Amanda. The name of the film was not called Carefree. It was named after the character I played, and her name was Amanda. And in Paris, I know it's known as Amanda, because they always say to me, "Oh, elle adore Amanda." I didn't know first what they were talking about, because I didn't think I'd made a film by that name, but then found out I had. At least in Paris, in France, I had. So the story had more substance, and I thought was just great, because I had a very good role to play.
Did you feel, because you've already said that you wanted to be able to do dramatic roles, perhaps reading between the lines, I hope not putting words in your mouth, you were looking for films that you could get your teeth into more in a dramatic way. Did you feel in general that the earlier films were as they should have been plot-wise, or did you think they were perhaps too flimsy plot-wise and they all could have been a bit stronger?
My thought about musical comedy always has been that to be a musical comedy, it has to be very thin-lined. It's unfortunate, but this was the way it generally has to be. There's so much, if it's too heavily storied by too much plot, the music has no place and can't come in and very graciously, and there's no time for it to be done. The music must be told as well as the story is being told. So you have here this conflict of music versus story idea, story plot. You have to have a thinner plot to tell a good musical, because it doesn't make too much work on the audience to have to figure it out. And I think that Amanda skipped it well, skipped through its little traces, or Amanda, I didn't mean Amanda, but Carefree went through its traces very well, because it had just enough story with more substance than anything that had been done before in our group of movies, and had some good music too. Maybe not the best of both worlds, but I thought it was an awfully good one. I personally was glad to have made Carefree. I think that's where we come to my feeling about it.
Did you particularly like Vernon and Irene Castle as a film?
Vernon and Irene Castle was a lovely story. I couldn't wait to do it. I wanted very much to do it. I love to make stories about people, real, honest to goodness people. And it's very rare that you can, because very few lives are worth telling without having to dramatize them to beyond recognition. And I even think in this story that had to happen. But I liked it, I loved it, I loved the costumes, I loved the period of it. Beautiful period clothes. And the music was fascinating, and incidentally, an interesting thing. There is a revival called No No Nanette musical comedy that's been on the boards here in America. They have taken out of Vernon and Irene Castle. The choreographer has taken one dance in its entirety and put it in No No Nanette in its absolute entirety. He just stole it and put it in. And it stops the show every night. So I've often thought, wouldn't it be fun to see one of the movies that Fred and I made together, and to have done it on a stage, to have heard the reaction from the audience would have been a great. It's the one thing that I miss when I'm thinking in retrospect about the films that we made together, is that it would have been a marvelous experience to have been able to suddenly put all this on a stage, put the whole film in front of a live audience as live actors, and enjoyed the applause that should have followed after each number. So it is a shame that at one point we could not have done that, which we never did, so unfortunately.
Did you prefer, or do you prefer, working to a live audience than to a camera?
It's a very hard question you've asked me. Terribly hard question to answer. Which do I prefer? Live audience or the audience of the cameraman, the set designers and so on, who act as your audience while you're doing a movie. It has such a... In the movie side of it, there are nuances that are not possible on the stage. And on the stage, there are actions that would not be photographable because of the wideness and the vitality and the vividness of the action. It's a shame that never the twain shall meet, but it's really true. I love both mediums so. Having come from the stage, my heart goes to the thought of being in front of an audience, because I know they're there. I know who they are. They're my people. But the other I have learned to love. I've learned it because my diet has been films. I mean, after all, I've made 73 films.
Follow that as a remark. There's no way, is there? 73?
Yes, 73 films.
I really am for a moment speechless. It's fantastic. In the story of Irene and Vernon Castle, not only were you playing the part of somebody who was factual and living. That person was there on the set for a lot of the time. How did you feel about this?
To have the lady the story is about, being on the set, Irene Castle in this case, because we were making the story of Vernon and Irene Castle. To have her on the set was somewhat disconcerting at times, but actresses know perfectly well that those things are not allowed to bother them. And I'm one of those actresses who behave in that manner. I know that that's not the thing that I should be thinking about. I should be thinking about my portrayal and not thinking what's happening off stage. So it really didn't persuade me. But I must say there were various disturbances that were made about the making of the film that were put forward through the producer, through the director, of the unhappiness of the lady who was Irene Castle. But then I really didn't have that to confront because it was not my job. It was not my production. It was not my direction. I was merely playing the role of the lady as Mr. Astaire was playing the role of the man. Yes, the rumblings of an earthquake do disturb you for a moment, but then you go on. And we did.
So in fact, any disagreements or any objections that she raised didn't really come into your orbit. You just knew that they were going on.
Yes, it did upon occasion, but you can't do that. You can't let these things. You have to learn to do this. You have to learn to go on. Your job is to perform and not to draw your sword. If you draw your sword, you have to put it back because that's not what you came to do.
Was it a film you were pleased with?
Very much. I liked it. I enjoyed it very much. Mm-hmm.
Why particularly?
Because, as I said earlier, it was a story about people who really lived, and I love stories about people. Whether I act in them or not is not the point, except that I just love stories about people who really did exist.
Onto a different tack altogether. During the war, did you and Fred do any entertaining for the troops together?
No, we did not. No, we did not entertain anyone.
Did you do any broadcasting together? Any radio?
I don't remember. I don't really remember.
How did you come to work on the Barclays of Broadway? Can you remember how? Because that was after a break, wasn't it?
Yes, I think it was. I think it was 9 years later. 9 years later, the Barclays of Broadway was asked. They called me. I was at my ranch. They asked me if I'd like to do Barclays of Broadway. I said, send me the script. They did. I liked it, and I did it. It was as simple as that. And the only reason I was invited to do it was because they couldn't think of anyone else to dance with Fred Astaire. And so I was available, and Judy Garland was the one who set up for the role. She took ill, and that was the way it was. That's what happened, and I went about it joyfully because I was doing other kinds of films at the moment. Happened to be just on a vacation when this occurred. Lucky for me that I was, because I would have missed it had I been locked up in something else.
Did you have any sort of misgivings about renewing a partnership that had existed and done great things 9 years before?
Well, you know, your question makes me think that my attitudes about things are like the sea. They run over the stone without knowing the stone is there. I don't look to the stone to push the water back. I just, like the sea, I go over the problem and make it work.
I just wondered whether there was any fear in your mind that a partnership that had worked very successfully at one time and then had stopped, whether if it came together again, it would be a monumental disaster?
You see, again, you're insisting upon my refreshing my thought to find a fear, which I never had.
I'm not. I really am not.
To find a fear, because my fears are not in that particular, I don't allow myself to think in those terms.
Right.
If I would think in those terms, I would not have continued making films very long.
The routines for the Barclays of Broadway, one understands, were written for Judy Garland, as opposed to being written for you. Do you remember them being adapted for you, or was there any difficulty in coming in and dancing routines that had been constructed perhaps with another type of dancer in mind?
Well, there wasn't anything constructed that was difficult, if that's what you might be aiming at.
Well, no, because I mean, you were a much better dancer than Garland anyway, so it wouldn't have been
I would say that the routines were more or less in line with the things that we had done in the past. It was just a matter of getting with it and seeing that we got them learned and executed them, you see, as we went along. But I didn't find anything in this movie that was, it was so Judy Garland that I couldn't do it, because Hamlet is Hamlet. No matter who plays it, they play it their own way. And whether it's Evans or Burton, it's Hamlet, regardless. It just happens to be their Hamlet, and this was my Hamlet, if it had been set up for Judy Garland, which it had. And I think it was just very good fortune that I was available to accept it when they began looking for someone to do it, when she took ill.
Did you find you enjoyed, was it nice to come back and work together again? Did you find
Yes, I found it fascinating and fun. I had all this space of time to think about having worked with Mr. Astaire and think about dancing. And in the meantime, I had not danced again, you see. It had been 9 years that I had not danced in. I'd done one thing without him that was musical. But this kind of dancing I hadn't done, and I thought it was great fun. As a matter of fact, if you ever run the picture, which you probably won't, but if you do, you'll see that there was a lot of vim, vitality, and good humor in the dancing. Probably some sparkle that hadn't been there before.
In the 50s and the 60s, did people try and get the two of you together again?
Yes, everyone I have ever talked to up until today have said, when are you and Fred Astaire going to do another film together? Because they don't make them like that anymore. And we need another film like that at this particular point in time. About that I agree, because I think this kind of film is something that is a need. Yes, everyone has said, why don't you do another film? But they've been saying this now for so many years. It's a song with music now.
If it had, at a time when Mr. Astaire was still dancing, would you have enjoyed working together with him?
Yes. Oh, surely. Of course. My thought has never changed about that. I think it's a lot of work. I don't want to say that it isn't. But it was. It was work in those days, hard work. But dancing is hard work. There is no way about it, no way around it. You either work to get it or you don't do it. And the way you do it is to work for it. I think that's the way I accomplish things in my life, is to work for them.
Do you think it was either a good or a bad thing, or didn't matter for both of you to so strongly have been identified as a team with each other?
Well, I don't believe I gave it that much thought. It's happened. It took place. I'm sure it's very much like saying to a mother, are you sorry you had a child, or would you like not to have had a child? I think this is the way I would say I'm very grateful that it took place, that we had this experience as teammates in making musical comedies together, and I think the team gave and brought a great deal of joy and a great deal of happiness to a world that was hungering and needing something other than guns and bullets and despair.
Do you think there is a principal ingredient that has made Fred Astaire as successful as he's been?
Well, I stated what I thought about Mr. Astaire at the beginning of our talk by saying I think it's the quality of his thought in his professional thinking and professional being that is the outstanding thing to me. He has a great sense of what is beautiful and what is graceful, what is style, what is class. These qualities of thought are developed, and you experience them by watching him. It's what he thinks, that's what we see. And what he thinks is lovely.
What do you think he's given to the world of entertainment?
I think he's given a rather unique idea of what the form of man can do other than stand and walk and jump. He can look beautiful and look handsome and look stylish and look exciting, gay, by whirling his lithe body around in various contortions and making them come up handsome. He's given a sculpture to the films that it never had before. He's given to the dance world a style that it never could delineate before. And he's given the woman of the world something to wish for in a male.